All right, we're back to We Are What We Hated, and I believe this is episode 22. And, of course, always with us is Larry, the contractor guy. And he had made mention yesterday in discussing what we're going to do today, and he mentioned William Ramsey, as he has several times, not only to me, but during the whole length of the program. And I just got this real brainstorm. It's like, maybe it's time we can get William on. So I asked him, and he's here. And, William, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it, especially with the short notice.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me back.
And we're going to talk about some of William's work and if there's anything else new that might be coming down the pike. And you've seen the website there. It's up with the audio, and that's occult911.com. So it was Larry's idea. And so, Larry, why don't you frame what we're going to do today, since this is obviously your baby and you wished for William to be here, and he's here.
Well, basically, I was wanting William to come on to discuss Crowley and his influence on the Nazis and Hitler, and also Crowley's influence on other individuals who were somewhat partially responsible for World Wars I and II, and of course we could talk somewhat about Crowley's influence on the events of the 21st century and 9/11. The first thing I wanted to ask William about is in his chapter 16 in Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11 and the New World Order, which we'll be talking about today. In chapter 16, it starts off with a picture of Crowley and a quote from him where he said, "Before Hitler was, I am." He made that statement in Time magazine, December 15th, 1947. And I was wanting to ask, what do you think he meant by that? And I kind of have an idea what he meant, but I'd like to get your take on that, and maybe you can elaborate on it somewhat.
Well, I think what he was trying to impart was that he was taking credit for kind of Hitler's actions, that he was kind of the ideologue, and Hitler was more of the actor of really what took place in the middle of the 20th century. So I think for him, he wanted to pervert that biblical quote and see himself as the kind of arbiter or the creator of that of the massive destruction or the influencer of the massive destruction of the World War II.
Well, I think he definitely had a great deal of influence. In fact, another quote you have in the book that I wanted to talk to you about was, you say in page 194, he represented an evil influence upon other people. Many of his associates and followers affected world events. J.F.C. Fuller was one of two Englishmen invited to Germany for Adolf Hitler's 50th birthday in 1939. There are not vast degrees of separation between Crowley and Hitler. The connection reaches merely from Crowley to Fuller to Hitler. Both Hitler and Crowley emphasized, if not completely dedicated to, the primacy of the human will. The Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl emphasized his ideology. Crowley had his own approach to human will, his word in law, thelema, which is will in Greek. Could you comment somewhat on J.F.C. Fuller? I think you're pretty familiar with him. As I understand it, Fuller was an OTO member, or at least an occultist, and he was also a very high-ranking general in the British Army, and was a man who had a lot to do with tanks and the development of tanks.
Well, J.F.C. Fuller had a connection with Hitler very early on with Crowley. Crowley had set up an award to be given out to somebody who wrote a book. It was a £1,000 reward. It was a sizable award, and J.F.C. Fuller wrote a book about Crowley called A Star in the West, and that started off kind of a relationship between the two. Eventually, there's a falling out that took place that's very typical in relationships Crowley had with his followers, but J.F.C. Fuller went on to write a variety of different books. He was very literate, much like Crowley. He formulated and learned from the events of World War I, where there was static warfare, and devised a strategy to use mechanized military tanks and et cetera to have a more mobile kind of attack structure during any other future warfare. And the English, being kind of a more seafaring nation, did not adopt these tactics, but they found a lot of adherents in the German High Command or the German War Command, and he also was kind of a pan-Nordic kind of, I guess you would say, kind of an occultist of that stripe, similar to Hitler, and he was one of only two two Englishmen invited by Hitler to attend Hitler's 50th birthday in, I think it was 1936.
I'm just curious. I know he had an influence on the Germans as far as their tactics. Was he, or do you know that if he had any influence on or any relationship with Guderian?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know. You know, he was kind of more of doing my research on Crowley. He was kind of like a side figure. I didn't really follow up a lot. I just thought it was pretty interesting that he had, there was a direct connection between him and Hitler. So yeah, I think, as far as his influence on the German High Command, I mean, I think that, according to my understanding, is that, I don't know Guderian in particular, but definitely the German military was definitely enamored of his writings.
All right, let me ask you guys a question, or make a statement, and then I have a question. With the passage you read, was before Hitler was I am. Is that what that was?
It was a statement that Crowley made.
Right.
I think in Time magazine, according to what William wrote. I'll let him address that.
Well, let me ask you this: do you not think also that there was a slap at Jehovah in that one?
Well,
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It's a direct reference from the statement that Jesus Christ made in front of the Jewish, during the time that Christ was in Jerusalem. So, he was definitely referencing that straight up.
All right,
and the name Jehovah, my understanding, is kind of I am what I am. That's what it means in Hebrew.
Does it strike you, gentlemen, strangely, if you think about it? That was in Time magazine, correct, Larry?
Yes.
Can you imagine a supposedly real Christian country back then looking at the cover of Time? I'm wondering if there was any kind of backlash toward the magazine for being, so unchristian or whatever, let that happen. Or whether Crowley, and I guess you can tell us perhaps, William, did he ever get any fallout from that? Because this guy seems to be a little bit like Teflon.
The reference in Time magazine was referencing a statement Crowley said about, before Hitler was I am, but it was in the Time magazine in 1947 upon his death. So
it was after the
I just referenced that article as Crowley saying that. When I was doing my research, I couldn't find the exact place where he had said that, but Time had referenced him saying that. So,
and the reason I just bring this up, and Larry, I'll throw it back to you. Just indulge me one more. I appreciate it. Thank you. No, I do. Honestly,
it's your show.
Here it is. That's it. Whenever it's just get the old guilt stick. All right. And this is based on a little bit of what William and I talked about earlier in the day, but he makes that comment, and he's pretty much out of Dodge by then, and his life's coming to an end. So I guess he could have done that. And if there was any angst directed toward him by a nation, I guess it really didn't matter because he was gone. However, what really struck me interestingly was that this guy at least was around long enough to have some import in both World War I and II. I talked to William before about the mentioning of Crowley with an individual who was a German American by the name of Eric. And, and there he was instigating stuff at the time, and maybe William gives a little thumbnail on what he claimed to be and what he might in fact have been. And then you see him again like in World War II. I mean, for a character that spans two wars, had a reasonable import in both, to a certain extent, in the espionage, if you will. He just does not get included in a whole lot of books, about both wars. So, William, with that, having said that, do you find it interesting that he was pretty much active in both wars, kind of like behind the curtain?
Yeah, I do. I think it's very interesting, particularly when, somebody as important on world affairs as Hitler, who really the 20th century, unfortunately, he was, probably the most important figure of the 20th century in many ways because of the war he created, and his ideology was so similar to Crowley. So it seems strange to me that so many historians and, intellectuals or literary figures have overlooked him and not addressed the import of that, particularly, in his relation to somebody was responsible for the death of millions.
All right, I appreciate that, Larry. I'll throw it back to you. And let me ask you this, though. Did you know that Crowley was kicking around, and he was stateside also, wasn't he, for a while, William, in World War I?
Right. So, he came right at the outbreak of World War I. He was in New York. He associated with, the literati. He was friends with a lot of, famous people at the time, or was at least in contact with them. And he left right around 1919 after the war and went back to England for a time and then ended up in Italy where he started his Abbey of Thelema. But, during the time that he was in New York, he was in Greenwich Village, so he was hanging around and associating with all of the, highlights of the people of that day who were, in the literary world, and that's what Crowley always aspired to be, is like a literary figure.
Yeah, Bohemians, you would call them then, wouldn't you?
Bohemians, yeah, that's absolutely.
So there you go, Larry. I mean, if you've not even been able to get into the First World War involvement of Crowley, I mean, this character, he spans quite a few decades and is a real pivotal figure.
Well, I think the Book of the Law, which Crowley supposedly wrote through automatic writing, Crowley attributed to, I believe the way it's pronounced is Aiwas. He attributed it to this being, and really when you get down to it, as William has said in his book here, in his own writings, by his own testimony, he repeatedly made contact with discarnate spirits, Aiwas, Alamantra, Abdul-Aziz, and Lam. He claimed personal authority from the secret chiefs, a hidden group of spiritual masters that shaped the destiny of mankind. The primary spirit he worshipped, Aiwas, provided him with the Book of the Law in 1904. Crowley referred to Aiwas as him, he, the ineffable one or Lord, and the entity as we now know, as evidenced by numerous references by Crowley's own hand, is the devil or Lucifer. I believe the Book of the Law was brought about to help Crowley influence what, in his book, Hitler, the Black Magician, Suster calls a demoniac movement. In other words, what Suster is saying is that Crowley was the primary human influence that helped bring about the First World War and eventually the Second World War, and the third will come, because these wars are planned by the powers of darkness and in the entity of Lucifer, the devil. Okay. I hope I've got that right.
No, and I mean, just to follow on in your reference, I mean, Crowley himself states right here, this being called Aiwas, an intelligence discarnate, who wrote this Book of the Law using my ears in hand, his mind certainly superior to my own in knowledge and power, for he has dominated me and taught me forever since. So, that's one of the reasons why I titled the book The Prophet of Evil, is that Crowley considered himself the prophet of the devil. And Crowley himself took responsibility for, creating or laying the groundwork for the ideologies that created World War I and World War II. Now, granted, how much of a responsibility that should be attributed to Crowley is, I guess, up to the listener or reader. But
right, it's an opinion, really, but I believe it was tremendous influence. And that's why I believe your book is so important, that people begin to understand the real motivations, the real reasons behind the First and Second World War. And I believe that you're entirely correct in that he influenced, in effect, the events of September 11th, 2001.
Yeah, and that was really the primary impetus of my research, or why I was researching Crowley. But then I recognized that his ideologies and his ideas were not just an influence upon 9/11, but a lot of the 20th century and Hitler. So, and you could have taken Crowley and Hitler and put them in two places where there would never have any bleed over, but the similarities in their ideology shows how important they are. And there clearly has been some type of, cross-fertilization between them through GFC Fuller and others and other OTO members. And Hitler, in his early years, he was enamored of the theater, and he loved this one play called Parsifal, which I know for a fact was written by an OTO member. So it had all this kind of like German.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah, the Grail and all this other stuff.
Grail, blood, and so forth.
Yeah, and then there's his attention, his attraction to Dietrich Eckhart, who he quotes in his Mein Kampf as like the most influential person, and Dietrich Eckhart was a master of the temple, much like Crowley was. I mean,
right.
they both took that title upon themselves. Crowley went a little bit farther and called himself a magus and one of the 7 most important people in human history.
He really loved to put titles, grandiose titles.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but
yeah. So my point is that this kind of ideology and outlook is very important, I think, for people to understand, because it shows how human beings can be capable of such violence and evil, really, unleash warfare and destruction.
Can I ask a question about Crowley? What you just mentioned, and this is a jump ball for both of you. One, he seems to have done a reasonable amount of clowning up, and I'm wondering if, one, he did that so as not to be taken all that seriously, so he could do the serious work afoot, or if, two, that was part of, like, quote, his playful spirit, because it has worked to a certain extent to make some observers, historians, whatever, say, no, he was pretty much showbiz. There was really nothing there, and I think that's a big mistake. So, what I'm asking you two gentlemen, do you think that clowning or that showmanship part of him was a deliberate, like facade? Go ahead.
Well, I can comment on that. I do think that it was deliberate. I think that he was a pretty sophisticated guy, so and he was also kind of he was trying to become a kind of a person of renown. So a lot of this clowning and public statements and things where he was always covetous or always wanted to obtain the press attention, So he was always trying to do it with his writings or public displays. So then, that was kind of like his public, his face that he gave out. But, the deeper that you got, the more serious he became. So, as a person with many facets, Crowley, as a complex person with many facets, Crowley definitely had this kind of joking exterior. But, once you read all his stuff about child sacrifice and, his blasphemies and stuff like that, there's a very, his sexual perversions and everything like that. There's a very dark center core to his character, I think, for certain, at least in my opinion.
Larry, what about that in your take? And then I have to ask you a question as well.
Well, I agree with William that he was a very serious guy underneath, and he did affect something of a clownish persona. I think part of it probably is because he kind of had the heart of a ham actor. I mean, he liked to run around in these elaborate outfits, with capes and turbans and just kind of affecting kind of a almost a comic opera look, But when you got down to it, and anyone who really became familiar with him, I would think it wouldn't take very long before they saw the seriousness of the man as far as his intentions, and just how incredibly intelligent and how incredibly evil the man was. I mean, when you read some of his writings, you almost have to stop at some point because it's just so disgusting and vile. I mean, the man was just vile was the best way to describe him.
This is kind of interesting, too, as an aside, but when you talk about this and I think back, and there's some other work I'm doing here that brings us to the forefront of my mind, and that is whenever you see the truly sinister and predatory people, I mean, even if you're talking about serial killers, I mean, I hate to use these terms, but like the really good ones, they're all brilliant. The most tragic consequences brought upon humankind, seems to have been the work of people who are just brilliant. This isn't some just, beat up little kid or something like that who grows up mean. And it's amazing time and time again. Now, what I wanted to ask you, Larry, on a scale of 1 to 10, first off, what do you think the number would be to equate whether or not Hitler and Churchill both knew there was a script?
Gosh, that's a question I've never really been able to answer. I would say at least a 5 or 6.
All right.
The reason I say that is it's never really been clear to me Hitler's intentions toward England. When you start to study Hitler, you begin to realize very very early on that he had a great deal of admiration for the British Empire.
That actually was the second part of the question.
Yeah, he had a tremendous admiration for the British Empire.
Right.
He loved the British crown, the British aristocracy, and he thought that the way that the empire was being run was great. And he really did not, from what I've read and from what I can gather, he really did not want to initiate a war with Great Britain. In fact, a lot of people think that the attack upon Great Britain, which became known as the Battle of Britain, was really just kind of a feint, which kind of set up his real intentions in attacking Russia in 1941. Of course, everyone knew from Mein Kampf that what they call Lebensraum, living room,
right,
is what they were seeking. They wanted Russia really badly. And of course, the Nazis politically despised communism, and the communists were their biggest political enemies.
They were what they hated.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, William, if you can add into this, and Larry, as well, and this is another question I would like to ask of you. William, is there any, and Larry too, have any of you come across anything that indicates that Crowley moved between England and Germany during the war?
Oh, yeah, he definitely did.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, now, during the war, that I don't know for sure, but I know that he spent a great deal of time in Germany. In fact, from Suster's book, I can read a little bit to you about the First World War. And for Crowley, a sincere and intelligent man had, despite these qualities, become convinced that he was in truth the beast 666, prophesied in the book of Revelation in the Bible and hailed in the book of the law, who would bring an end to the Christian age. He welcomed the First World War not only as a vehicle for the destruction of the old eon, a baptism of blood, but also as the messenger of the freedom which he believed would dawn upon the people of the world. The war did not have this latter effect. The people of the world were much too badly frightened to cope with freedom. Crowley thereupon adopted the view that yet another and more destructive world war was inevitable and would soon come. After the war, Crowley returned to England, found the climate inhospitable, and set sail for Sicily, where in Cefalù he founded the Abbey of Thelema, or Will. And it goes on to talk about his Crowley had visited the Third Reich on a number of occasions, but was under no illusions as to its nature. He believed correctly that Hitler was a magician bent upon changing the nature of civilization and of man. He was probably in error, though, when he stated that Hitler had read the Book of the Law and followed many of his precepts quite consciously. The truth is more likely to be that Hitler unconsciously expressed the more disturbing of his doctrines, for both Crowley and Hitler drew their inspiration from the demonic. We have seen how Crowley became convinced that another world war was imminent, and a pamphlet which he wrote in the 1930s is certainly of interest. And that pamphlet, I believe, was Equinox of the Gods. And William references that in his book, where he talks about how Crowley did some publicity stunts to talk about the Equinox of the Gods. And it says, Crowley never abandoned his need to engage in strange publicity stunts. In the Daily Express of December 23, 1937, portions of a prophetic book of Aleister Crowley's were read at Cleopatra's Needle at 6:22 a.m. as the sun entered Capricorn by an Englishman, a Jew, an African, and a Malayan. There was a short speech by Crowley as priest to the princes. With his disciple Gerald York by his side, he proclaimed, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law to all the races of the world." He also proclaimed again the law of Thelema. He then gave each individual present a copy of the Equinox of the Gods. Publicly, he stated that he had published 3 times and that each time war broke out 9 months later, that the might of his magic would burst out and cause a catastrophe to human civilization. He said that if everybody would do what he told them, the catastrophe could be averted. And that was referenced in the Daily Express of December 23rd, 1937.
What I'm wondering about is whether or not Crowley's moving about was an indication that there was a script. You know, what was it? Hess that flew over unannounced, more or less, and they slammed his butt in jail. It strikes me interesting if he was really trying to be an honest peace broker, and yet Crowley could move around, and that's you know, kind of all where I'm going at is if he was able to do that, then that tells me a little bit of something about whether or not both higher-ups knew where this whole thing was going. One other question, too, by the way. Do either of you know or infer exactly who, not what, but who gave the Nazis the what we would have called before the Roman salute?
You know, I think Suster references that, but I can't remember exactly. But I think the reason for the Roman salute, you know, the what do they call it, the Caesar salute or whatever, is that Hitler really believed himself to be, the new Roman emperor. He believed himself to be establishing a new Holy Roman Empire.
Okay.
And really the same with Mussolini. I think first started that salute.
William, you have any guesses? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
All right, I'm just going to throw this out. There is I don't know if this is a true thing or whether it's turned to urban legend. There are some, whoever some are, that attribute it to good old Dietrich.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the story goes further that Dietrich gave Hitler that, and that in turn Crowley gave Winnie the V sign. They both
right, and that peace sign has dual meanings. I mean, the peace sign also represents 23, and 2/3 of 1 is 666. So people say that as peace, but you'll see some occultists lay that, 3 fingers down, 2 fingers up sign all over the place.
Right, and that was supposed to be.
So there's an esoteric and exoteric, esoteric, dual meaning there, one for the public and one for the insiders.
Which in a way makes me tend to believe somewhat that there was some kind of reality to that, even though we're not supposed to talk about the occult side of anything, especially the war. But that would make sense to me in a certain vein. So, here again, the man behind the scenes. And does anybody know? I mean, again, did Dietrich Eckhart have any kind of quote relationship with Crowley?
Not that I could figure out. I mean, I know that the OTO was, it was a German secret society, and Crowley became the head of it. So, because it's a secret society, it's hard to discern or determine, all their real connections. But, Crowley was the head of a German secret society.
Larry, what do you think?
I think Suster talks about that. I know that he was influenced by Crowley. I don't know if he had a personal relationship with him, but he definitely was influenced by Crowley, according to Suster. And I think Suster would know, since Suster himself was a member of the OTO. He's dead now, but he was greatly influenced by Crowley himself. And all through his book, Hitler the Black Magician, each chapter he references a passage from the Book of the Law. He's very familiar with that, and I think, from what I gathered in the book, Suster sees himself as a white magician. I think it's all the same stuff, but he believes in that he's doing good with his magic. He considers himself, or considered himself, a magician. It's interesting in his summary of what he says about the New World Order and what the Book of the Law is all about. And it says that nearly 2,000 years of Christian civilization, which ultimately led to the domination of the world by the values of the West, have come to an end. That the end of the old eon and the character of the new was foreseen by artists, poets, and occultists in the dying years of the 19th century. That a remarkable insight into ensuing events was written in the form of a prose poem called the Book of the Law, which announced the new eon. That the 20th century has been a swift and unprecedented transformation in the conditions of life on our planet, including 2 world wars, the collapse of all European empires, and the destruction or inversion of previous values. That some kind of force, hitherto unsuspected by science, whether physical or psychological and moving in the depths of our collective unconscious, has impelled the destruction in poetic fashion. We have personified it as Horus, the Egyptian god of war, or else referred to it as an eruption of the demonic. that certain individuals who practiced the neglected and despised arts of magic and mysticism, which involve the comprehension of forces like the one referred to, invoke this current to further their own ends, whether the attainment of the enlightenment and truth or the achievement of political power. That one of these individuals was Adolf Hitler, whom we may call the greatest black magician of the century, whose beliefs were a warped amalgam of the occult irrationalities which Western civilization had for so long suppressed. That both Hitler's success and Hitler's failure were due to the application of the magical world outlook he'd acquired. That the manner of his application was confined within the limitations of a completely contemptible personality, and that in consequence, the Third Reich was a negation of the human spirit and a blasphemous parody of everything affirmed in the true principles of magic. Well, I don't agree with that, but Hitler's personality complemented both the frustrated hatred of the people whom the First World War prepared for this adventure and the nature of the demonic force which he believed himself to control and which instead came to control him, its demon of nightmare, vengeance, and destruction which it flung aside. That this process of destruction, accompanied by repeated eruptions of the demonic in the minds of groups and individuals, is continuing and will continue until the old order has been irrevocably obliterated and we can do nothing whatever that will halt this process. Sorry that was so wordy, but I kind of needed to get that out because that's really the synopsis of the book, Hitler, Black Magician. And as far as Dietrich Eckart, it's very clear that Eckart was a serious occultist and a black magician himself. He was the guy who groomed Hitler. In fact, Eckart said himself that was his role, that was his job. I guess assigned to him by Satan.
Yeah, well, he said, Eckart, when he lay dying, he said this is December 1923, he says, "Follow Hitler, he will dance, but it is I who've called the tune. I've initiated him into the secret doctrine," that references Blavatsky, "opened his centers of vision and given him the means to communicate with the powers. Do not mourn for me, I shall have influenced history more than any other German." Yeah, so he stated that on, and that's referenced in the Encyclopedia of Occultism.
Right. And Hitler dedicated Mein Kampf to Dietrich Eckart.
Yeah, and he said, this is what he said at the end of Mein Kampf. He said, Hitler wrote, "I should like to mention the name of a man who devoted his life to reawakening his and our people through his writing and his ideas, and finally through positive action. I mean Dietrich Eckart."
All right, let me call time out for a second. We're at the bottom of the hour, and we've made references, Larry's made references throughout this particular series about William's book. Again, we said, as you can see, along with the audio, that the website is occult911.com. He's authored the book about which we've spoken much, about Aleister Crowley, but he's also turned out to be a producer now with the DVD, Occult Hollywood. So why don't you just break down what's going on, William, and also I got a feeling that you're probably up to something else if you can give us a little peek into that.
Yeah, I just, I put together a couple DVDs. One is kind of has a visual study of Aleister Crowley, and that's you can actually watch them on Amazon Video on Demand, and also Occult Hollywood. So once I recognized that these numbers were important and they trace back to occultism, Satanism, and I saw them in all these films, I kind of put this stuff together and compiled it for at least as a reference for people to take a look at and see how often they are used in public cultural references. And then I am working on a couple things. One is kind of the occult background of Obama that I've been trying to get done. I think people find that. Yeah, I mean that's the real relationship between Obama and all these guys is they have an occult connection. I mean he's laid out some very serious statements that tie him to Skull and Bones, that tie him to Satanism. He uses the number 72 a lot, and he gave some very interesting public statements. I think in Berlin under the
when he made that trip over there.
Yeah, and then he when in his victory. And I think I restated this in one of our old discussions, but on his victory night, he recreated the temple at now I can't even remember. But essentially, the temple that is referenced in Revelations is the place where Satan's seat was, and So and Hitler kind of did the same thing. He wanted to have that emulated in Nuremberg. But
are you referring to Brandenburg?
I'm sorry?
Are you referring to Brandenburg?
No,
okay.
I'm referring to the.
Talking about Egypt.
No, it's the. Oh gosh.
The reason I say it because he wound up getting a photo op at that famous place. I believe it's in Brandenburg. I don't know where there is an obelisk inside a circle, a rotary, an auto rotary.
Oh yeah. I remember that. I don't know what city or place that was, but I remember seeing that photo.
But I mean, he hit a couple of places in the Holy Roman Empire when he went over there, which I thought was a very interesting trip. But I'm sorry, William. Please continue.
Well, I was just saying, Obama recreated the temple at Pergamum. That's in Berlin, and that was what he recreated, a direct semblance of it for his final victory speech. So, and that's referenced.
That's the great high holy seat of paganism, and supposedly the throne of the devil. Correct?
Correct. That's correct. Right. So, you can see the pictures of him, and he makes all these references. He makes occult references just like Bush Jr. did, and then. I'm working on another, couple. I got all kinds of stuff that if I had more time, I'd put it out there, but I unfortunately don't. I actually have an assignment for you, Larry, so we'll have to talk offline here.
Okay. Hopefully I can pull it off.
Oh, I think you can.
Oh, sure. Do you want to issue that on air or off air?
Off, definitely.
Okay. Right. Oh, that's not good. All right. Now, I'm going to throw a question out to you, William, and then Larry, please respond, and then I'm out of here again.
Sure.
We talk about this and the relationship between Germany and Britain, and I mean, they're first cousins. It's like, what's the problem with you guys? And then, so here's what I'm going to ask you. What do you think the probability is that these were somewhat orchestrated wars, but that the real purpose perhaps for them was everything and everyone that got caught in between this, that got mashed during both wars? When you think about all that took place because of World War I, which was Quigley would say it was pretty much a land grab by certain powers in Europe to include Italy. And then you think about World War II. I mean, was it about whacking the Jews? Was it about smacking France around? You know what I mean? So think about both wars and all that happened. Not necessarily collateral damage, but direct damage. What are the chances that these wars were constructed not as hatred between Germany and Britain, but to get some other agendas fulfilled? What's the chance of that, William?
I think it's high. I mean, I think that, war is a time of great change, and people want to, capitalize on it at any time. I think that there were a lot of different agendas. Hitler always had a fixation with payback against France, so it wasn't anything that was a surprise when, after the Germans conquered France, that he rolled out the same rail cart that the guy from World War I signed the armistice and then made the French sign the capitulation agreement. And so he was remembering what happened, and he was part of those early battles. So he got the payback, but also, it allowed him time to institute. Once he realized the war was being lost, that's when the whole battle against the Holocaust ramped up. Mm-hmm. And so that was his other kind of totally racially motivated, grievance against the Jews was really ramped up and done. And they threw, it was a grievance against a whole bunch of different minorities, including the gypsies.
I think the grievance against the Jews also was a blood sacrifice to his quote God. I think that the First and Second World Wars were definitely part of the powers of darkness wishing to bring in a new world order, if you will, a world government, a world religion, and it's the work of Satan. And I think that 9/11 was the kickoff of the Third World War.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's what I think. There's all kinds of more, what should we say? I don't want to use the word mundane, but there were earthly events that happened. There are different actions taken by different nations and individuals that brought on. There were social and sociological causes for World War I and II, but really behind the scenes, the overall reason for it, the reason for those machinations, is coming straight from Lucifer and his minions. It's the powers of darkness, and these events were, just as Suster said, demonic. They were brought about. It's a progression toward world government. You had the First World War brought in the League of Nations, the Second World War brought in the United Nations, and the Third World War will bring in a world government, and it's all designed that way. It was also a desire to kill off as much of humanity and inflict as much misery on humanity as possible by that enemy of humankind, which is Satan the devil, who hates us with a tremendous passion. He and his minions hate humanity. They hate everything that's good, everything that represents kindness, compassion, love, etc., all the good qualities that humans have. And that's because he hates God. And that's really what it's all about as far as I'm concerned.
You know, if we can agree, if this is an accurate statement, that ethnically the Brits and the Germans are pretty much joined at the hip. But the French
there's a lot of overlap there. I mean, when you come down to it,
sure,
the Angles and Saxons were Germanic tribes that moved west into Britain.
But the French
and pushed the Celtic people to the west.
But the French were not part of that, were they?
No.
Were they Norman?
I don't. I really couldn't.
Okay,
couldn't get into all the genealogies and racial or ethnic.
Well,
all I know is that during the First World War and after, well, I should say after the First World War, that the Germans had a tremendous hatred for the French that they really didn't carry over so much to the British. They never made a whole lot. I mean, there was a certain amount of hatred toward the British for beating them in the war, I'm sure. Of course, people that fought them in battle probably hated them, but I think overall that the Brits kind of, were not considered the main enemy. It was the French. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler rails on, I say Hitler, probably Father Bernard Stampfel, who wrote Mein Kampf, probably, railed on about the French more than any other nation.
I'm just going to throw this out, and it's food for thought, but because of the three of us being able to dialogue here, it has struck me that the Brits were pretty much pitched enemies to the French to a certain point, and then it seemed the Germans took over, at least in the 19th century when you have the Alsace-Lorraine problem and all that. But, really, when you think about it, I mean, the French got absolutely beat to death in World War I. Mm-hmm. The amount of manpower they lost through the war in death. And then the second time around, we kind of make fun of the French, and it's like a kind of a little parlor joke. But even in the Second World War, that they went belly up real quick. I mean, who could have blamed them? But the thing is, the
reason they went belly up real quick is because they were stabbed in the back by a fifth column within their own country. The French aristocracy decided that they wanted to throw in with Hitler because they saw Hitler as the means of stopping socialism and communism. If you remember the history of France in the 1930s, there was a very strong left-wing element in France that had controlled the government at one point. That was the government of Leon Blum. Leon Blum was not a communist, but he was a socialist.
Okay.
And he was an enemy of the French upper class. They really despised him and his government. And they saw in Hitler kind of the St. George who would slay the dragon of, socialism and communism. And they really had many business ties to the same people that had put Hitler into power. So really, you had the French upper class. There's all kinds of evidence of that. I could get into that. There was a book written by a man named Pierre Cot, who wrote Triumph of Treason, in which he had been a minister in the French government. I think he'd been an armaments minister at one point, I believe. At any rate, he wrote a book called Triumph of Treason, in which I think I laid it out here in the series, where he showed how it went all the way from the newspapers, the intelligentsia, the aristocrats, and the French army. There were people in the French army, generals, and people in the higher ranks, who made it a point to betray the country and allow the German army to win. And they also had been the same people who opposed modernizing the French army and not getting new technology, such as more modern planes and tanks that could compete with the Germans.
Last comment, and Larry, please go with the line of question you have for William while we got him
Sure.
here. But I also have to laugh because when you think about the Revolutionary War, the two nations represented for the supposed enemy was Britain and, well, at least the Hessians, right? Germans. But who came on our side? The French. You know, it's like, why don't you guys ever want to play with us nicely? You know what I mean? And I you know, like I said, they get a bad rap, but nobody suffered more, I think, in World War I than they did. So, I'm just bringing that out, and you guys have both said to a certain extent to affirm the fact that there's a whole lot of stuff that occurred while these two giants went after each other. So, Larry, take it away, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, reference a quote from William's book and have him maybe elaborate on it somewhat. And this is on page 195. Crowley's influence is nearly suffused in the events of September 11th, with copious numerological references and the formula of the New World Order, ruled by an elite, the strong over the weak, and a new form of serfdom. His prophetic vision of magic, Satanism, blood, and sacrifice burst into full bloom in the new millennium with the events of 9/11. To fully comprehend the events of the 21st century and the direction of the world, Crowley, the great B666, prophet of the new eon or age, must be understood. All of humanity must reawaken to the problem of evil. We must recognize, must identify evil, and provide a warning to others. As all lines of history move forward to converge at a nexus point at the top of the pyramid, the legacy of the prophet of evil, Aleister Crowley, casts a long shadow upon the events of the 20th century and will continue to influence events in the new millennium. I was wondering, William, if you could elaborate that on somewhat and where you see things going. I mean, your personal worldview. Do you? And I'd like to ask you specifically: do you see a third world war occurring?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're in a new next generation third world war right now, and we have been since 9/11. I think that we've seen so many governments destabilized and overthrown. Whether they call it an Arab, Spring or all this other nonsense, it's still revolution. Whether it's in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, attempt in Syria, Iran, Iraq, you see these stolen elections. You see massive propaganda, chemtrails, poisoning of the food and water. This move towards population control through vaccines. Just incredible lies on the media and distortions, and it's kind of it has to be seen, or to me it's seen as a war against humanity. So I definitely think we're in it. I think that it'll probably continue to flare up until the real fundamental problem is addressed, and that is that these people are really trying to reformulate the whole world and do it based upon evil designs, largely formulated by, well, essentially the devil, but also his servants on the earth, people like Aleister Crowley and Adolf Hitler, and there are people who admire them, namely in our country, it would be George Bush Sr., David Rockefeller, and George Bush Jr.
Larry, with kind of a German twist to this as well, if I think we've talked about the fact that the only other pope that took the name of Benedict was the one that presided over World War I in the Spanish flu. And now we have Ratzinger, who has nothing really to do with that order, taking that name on. And as what
and
William
just happens to have been a soldier in the Third Reich during World War II and a member of the Hitler Youth.
And then his predecessor, too, had a little bit to do with I.G. Farben, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, if we're looking at this Third World War, William has just mentioned it. I mean, it seems to me that there, and if we agree that there's always an agenda other than two belligerents going at each other, that there's going to be a lot, unfortunately, that would happen through a Third World War. It would be the depopulation that the elites love.
Yes.
And then
and
later,
they always have. They always have.
Yeah, and then, well, and I'm only going to say this. In the United States, the Spanish flu went through the country, but it was heavily believed that it was the soldiers who were vaccinated that brought that back with them. And there's a story you can read online about, what is her name? Oh, what am I doing this? Called The Poison Needle. All right, I'm not even going to try to do the name right now. Which talks about a woman who ministered to sick people in their neighborhood. She, her father, and mother, they weren't vaccinated, and they actually could minister to the sick and they never got sick themselves. So anyway, that's another aside. But my point is, it's nice to have a killer loose on a population after the war because it picks off the weak, whoever's left over, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Eugenics.
And you don't want to do it before because in a social biological sense, it's always been stated that human beings are crazy because they send they send the strong off to war to die, but the weak, vis-a-vis 4F, let's say, stay behind. So in this case, it would be that, and plus if you introduce a la Spanish flu 1918, 1919, whatever, after the fact, to me, that's like letting, the maggots eat the dead flesh after the wound has been opened. So I think we're looking at something like that. And I don't think that we're going to see contagion before we're going to see a global conflagration.
Well, look at Gulf War syndrome. Where did that come from?
Wow.
I think it came out of a laboratory somewhere, and we don't have time to even get into that. But I think that that had the same. It was definitely a part of the biowarfare eugenics program of the United States government.
And all governments right now. I mean, this is here to stay with us. And as William referenced too, even today I look outside and on the weekends, and they've been doing this a little bit more. The chemtrails get heavier, and it's like, okay, look, I don't feel them, I don't know. I just don't like the fact that that's happening, and it can't be good no matter what it's for. But that's the way things are in this particular time of the globe's history, and will certainly continue to be that way. So again, thanks for bringing that into the conversation, William. And I just wanted to throw that out. And again, Larry, take it away with wherever you want to go while we got William.
Well, really, I didn't. I think I pretty well exhausted most of my questions, but I was wondering basically what William thinks about this concept that Crowley was definitely a prophet. We were talking about his going and pulling the publicity stunts. What I never figured out was what really the purpose of that was. I mean, just I guess maybe to get more people to listen to him, but I really wasn't sure, why he went around doing the prophecies that he did. I know that in Suster's book he talks again about this deal with the equinox of the gods, and here it says the Master Therian Crowley has undertaken the work of Omegas to establish the word of his law on the whole of mankind. He will succeed, and as long as the book of the law was in manuscript, it could only affect a small group amongst whom it was circulated. It had to be put into action by publishing it. And I was wondering if that's what you see. How do you see the publicity stunts to popularize Crowley?
Well, I think that Crowley definitely had an evangelical bent. He saw himself as a teacher or a world teacher. He stated that many times.
Right.
And when the Krishnamurti was set forth by the Theosophical Society, he immediately went into action and tried to counter his, the movement of, I think it was Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater tried to, create this Maitreya figure. He wanted to forestall that and proclaim himself. So all these type of publicity things that he did were, part of his personality, but also the way for him to attract followers. Like he always had a solution, just like all these other false prophets or false messiahs, like, I guess L. Ron Hubbard, who was a follower of Crowley. They all had they have a solution to all your problems, whatever it is, and we can do it. And so he was always putting himself up there, and that's how he got additional people to come and give it, and that's how he earned his living, really. Like any kind of spiritual con man, he got people to come on board, and then he would try to milk them for as much money as he could after he went broke, in the 1920s. So
yeah, he was a con man.
Yeah, he was really. That was part of the con. He was a legitimately evil person, but he also, was, he considered he had such a high opinion of himself that he never really worked an honest day in his life other than writing. But so that would be my thinking about as to why he was always trying to get publicity, was just to attract followers, and he did attract very important people to him. The more I wrote the book and just said, I'm done, I'm finished. But even since I finished it, 18 months ago, I've learned more. And, there were the Asters. The Jacobs were affiliated with Crowley and knew him back in New York in the war years of the First World War. So Crowley's able to ingratiate himself with so many people through, his publicity and because of his repute or his ill repute, I guess.
Well, William, now you did it. I got to ask you this, and by the way, you got great timing, Larry, because we're really coming up to the hour. So that was good to say you about drained all the questions that you had for William. But I'm going to throw this out because Larry, I know you're familiar with Kira.
I really don't know her. I've heard her speak.
Right.
I've heard her interviewed before, but I haven't corresponded with her.
No. But I mean, you know that she had done the work on Garfield.
Right.
And his assassin.
That was good work, as a matter of fact.
Well, she's on to something else, and this is what brings me into this because of what William just mentioned. And I'd like to just throw this out. And let me ask you, Larry, did you ever read The Secret Enemy? What is it? The two books by Bill Hughes, Enemy Unmasked and The Secret Terrorist. Have you ever read them?
No, I haven't read either one.
All right. It's mentioned there. Here's what I'm going to throw to you. If any of you know anything, but I'll go with you, William, because one, you got to leave, and two, you mentioned Aleister.
Yeah, you probably know more than I do.
But it's my show.
It's show.
It's my show.
I can stay on past the hour. I'm good to go. I've got time. Unless you're trying to get rid of me, I will.
No.
It's been a pleasure having you on, believe me.
Well, I mean, he may be getting rid of you, but I'll stay.
Okay.
All right. Here's where I'm going. No, by all means stay. But I mean, like I said, it was nice of your family to allow that too, because it's a weekend and such, and I'm not taking that for granted. So thank you. All right. Here's where I'm going to go with this. There are a number. Okay, a number. What does that mean? I know at least of 3 versions of what happened to Aleister on the Titanic. One is the mainstream, and there's 2 others. It is very curious that he died on that ship when supposedly 2 others who were magnates, I think one of them might have been Vanderbilt, I'm not sure, all had booked but then said, you know what, we're not going to leave, and they went back, and they didn't sail. We all know what happened to the Titanic. Does anybody have any kind of indications that Titanic sinking stunk to high heaven and whether Aleister was the principal for it?
I have no idea.
All right.
I do not know.
Okay.
It would be interesting, though. I mean, I know that there are plane flights and things like that. I think there was plane 553? It was sometime during, after Kennedy got killed. There was a fixed plane flight, and people tried to get other people to get on that flight because they knew it was going down. You ever heard that one? So maybe the Titanic was like that. I'll have to send you that information. But there was it's the one where Everett Howard Hunt's wife died in that plane crash.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a fixed plane crash. She was meant to die, and they tried to get other people on there. All these other, and there's a African American guy who's very famous. I forgot. He's always doing fasts and stuff like that. But somebody tried to get him on that flight.
Dick Gregory.
Dick Gregory. Yeah, they tried to get Dick Gregory on that flight. Yeah. So they were going to try to kill a whole bunch of people all at once on that one.
Well, some thoughts are that there's certain parties that wanted Aleister's fortune, and that his wife was on that boat as well, but she did not die. As the story goes, the women and the children went first, but the other story is that there was plenty of room for other males as well. Who knows what that was about? Supposedly also that they shot the wrong flares in the air, if you can believe that. If you're in duress at night, you're supposed to shoot up red flares to see if you can, at least get some trawler or whatever's out there to help you. They shot white ones, which meant, hey, we're having a party. Well, somebody was perhaps.
They were having one, all right.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like
it's kind of an interesting aside, but when I was in law school, the first book that this guy William Kovacic, who is my professor, who went on, he was at least under the Bush administration, the head of the FCC. But the first book that he gave us wasn't a law book. It was A Night to Remember about the Titanic, because he tried to analogize how many mistakes that were made through pride and oversight and, this can't happen. He tried to analogize that to court cases because what can go wrong can go wrong. So it was kind of interesting that, he made us read that. It was something kind of counterintuitive or unexpected. But
for us on the level that we do things, I mean, I'd have to say just thinking about how he approached it, that would necessarily mean that they really were mistakes. And I think kind of like where we're at, because if you're going to deal with conspiratorial incidences or whatever you want to call it, or history, you take a look at everything and you got to look at it askew, because you never trust anything anymore that comes out of mainstream. So I'm wondering, I mean, if he actually thought they were mistakes, and I'm wondering, like, were they really mistakes? And as I think I had written to Robert K. Dent not long ago, what I find interesting, and this may be brewing for us as well, and again, why I think that sometimes wars, or all wars, are scripted. What in the world was in Napoleon's mind when he brought the Grand Army to try to go ahead and kick some Russian butt at what time of the year? And then Hitler, what, we're going to start...
Same mistake, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to go to Russia's doorstep in the fall and see if we can just get rid of them.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, Viz, because
Sure.
Suster addressed that. He said that it's not as simple as that, you know, Hitler just became arrogant. What he was saying was that Hitler had been given some really bad information from some of the occultists that worked for Himmler, and that he bought into these ideas. And these occultists were the disciples of a man named Horbiger, who had some very strange theories about, you know, the Earth, and it was basically an occultist, a bunch of occultists that had made Hitler think that he could go ahead, and kind of gave him the big head about going in at the time that he did. And he says, the Führer's War Directive 3710, October 1941, refers to the final capture of Murmansk, the Fisherman's Peninsula, and the Murmansk Railway next year. Hitler certainly thought that the Russian army would be crippled by December 1941, but as his directive shows, he envisioned fighting in 1942. As for winter quarters, it is difficult to envision where he thought these would be, for he had ordered the total destruction of places of shelter such as Leningrad. The real reason for the inadequacy of this soldier's equipment is to be sought in the pronouncements of the disciples of Horbiger. Horbiger had insisted that his theory enabled one to predict the weather all over the planet months and even years in advance. Consequently, Heinrich Himmler had employed devoted Harbingers, or Harbingerians, I guess, in the meteorological section of the SS Honorary Department. These confidently declared that the Russian winter of 1941-42 would be relatively mild. Hitler believed them, and hence saw no need for his soldiers to be provided with winter clothing. The results of this decision were disastrous for Germany. The first snow fell in early October. By early November, temperatures had fallen below zero. Lubricating oil froze and jammed the German guns. German synthetic fuel separated into two component parts. Dressed in light summer uniforms, lacking warm headgear, winter boots, protective clothing, or goggles to prevent snow blindness, thousands of soldiers dropped from frostbite or died of exposure while performing their natural functions. In December, the temperature dropped to minus 40 degrees centigrade, and the Red Army launched an all-out counterattack. Obsessed by the desire to capture Moscow, Hitler forbade retreat and ignored the conditions in which his troops were fighting, but Moscow remained in Russian hands, and the Red Army steadily pushed back the German troops.
Well,
but, you know, there's nothing like getting your weather report from an occultist.
Yeah, really.
You know, I watched the History Channel or the Military Channel. I think it was the Military Channel that was also breaking that down. And what they came up with is three major flaws, but one of them is no exit strategy. And I dwell on that because my thought was, if it was a rigged deal, it was time for the Reich to go down the tubes. And so they sent them off with everything that could possibly go wrong. Kind of hard to believe that, you know, and then you got to wonder, you know.
Well, I think Hitler was so infused with the demonic spirit. It may have been Satan himself that possessed him. I think it was probably one of his minions. I don't know how that works. I don't want to know. But I think he was so infused with this, you know, belief that he was going to do these great things. He was going to conquer Russia, and he was going to be the great hero. And he really didn't care how many people died. I mean, it didn't matter at all to him how many people died. That was fine with him. In fact, I think part of his strategy, according to Bob Rosio, was that he get these soldiers killed. This was part of a blood sacrifice to his god, Satan. And I think the more people that were killed on both sides, the better he liked it.
Let me just ask you, William, are you familiar with Rosio's books at all?
Rosio. No.
All right. The reason I bring it up is that Bob Rosio is a Christian, and he published a series of books. I think Huntington House was his main publisher. But as life is weird and everything else, I mean, in 1987, my wife and I moved out to Pittsburgh for some strange reason, and we wound up going to his church. And I didn't know who he was beforehand. I mean, he was just a pastor, and we went to church. And then later on, I find out what kind of historian he was. And after we moved back to Jersey, he sent me a whole bunch of books. And it was then in 1994 when I read, I think it was, does this sound right, Larry? Hitler in the New Age or something like that? Or
I think that's correct, yeah. The title is similar to that, not exactly.
And what hit me, I mean, what a cement head I am, it was only then in 1994, 13 years after accepting Christ as Savior, and not ever even getting into the conspiracy game until 2000, 2001, I never put it together that Satan is alive and kicking and was manifest in that war. I think a lot of Christians are today, as I was then, thinking hey, when's Satan come around? We never realize the occult nature of wars, and that he is most pleased when people are spilling each other's blood. So,
exactly.
This may be something you haven't even thought about because it was a slam dunk for you guys, but I'll throw it to you first, William. I mean, I was slow to realize that the machinations of the world are embraced fully by Satan, and these wars don't happen because two people can't really get along too well.
Right. I mean, it's. I think that there's definitely dark forces that capitalize on conflict. So Hitler was from his start in the 20s was captivating. I mean, even before that, if you talk to Kubizek, some of the historians for Kubizek were some of the historians for Hitler were rejected by common historians, like his childhood friend Augustus Kubizek and Rauschning and stuff like that. People who knew Hitler, but because they were first-person narratives, they weren't talked about. But Kubizek said that Hitler had all these speeches, and he was always into the occult, and he would always rail, and he would go into he was capable of putting himself into a trance.
Yes.
Like he'd just stare off into space. So, clearly he had some strange spiritual
leanings.
From very early.
Suster says that Hitler demonstrated many of the traits of a black magician, and just what you were talking about, the ability to go into a trance, the ability to control his breathing, and
right.
And numerous people have talked about the quality of his eyes, that his eyes, when he stared at people, that he had a hypnotic effect, and that this has a great deal to do with his charisma. And I mean, if you look at Hitler, on a film, he's pretty much a mundane, ordinary Joe. I mean, in fact, he's kind of on the ugly side.
I was just saying, can we use Doofy?
Kind of, somebody you probably wouldn't pay any attention to at all. But, he's able to go to these rallies, and all these people are just knocked out by him. It's not like he had movie star looks or something, or a tremendous physique, athletic physique. He was just really, pretty much a dork.
Well, let's remember also, he was a world-class farter, wasn't he?
That's what they said,
I
yeah.
know,
I think so, yeah. I think he had some problems in that area.
But what William said, and we just heard, and as you just expanded upon as well, that was what Rosio had in the book that shocked me. And then I never even heard about all the Buddhist monks they found dead in the bunker.
Oh yeah, that was the whole Aryan. They had gone back to Tibet to find the roots of the Aryan race, and their beliefs that the Aryans escaped the Great Flood, and they went to Tibet because it was the highest place in the world, and that their ancestry of the original Aryans had left remnants there in Tibet.
All right, now
how do you spell Rosio? Is it R-O-C-I-O?
R-O-S-I-O.
Oh, okay.
And as I said, I mean, I didn't realize, quote, who he was, because that kind of information is never going to be embraced, on the mainstream in Barnes & Noble.
Right.
But after I left, he started shipping me the books, and I'm reading them, and that's when I'm freaking out, going, I never, ever put it together. And that's why now what I'm trying to at least share with believers and non-believers, this NWO thing is Satan's tattoo. I mean, that's what we're dealing with, folks.
Right.
And the fact that if you want to go fist fight with it, you're going to get destroyed. But there's a way out of this, and we've all shared that. But if you think you're going to go in there and kick it in the shins and win, no, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, here's an interesting thing this is from Rauschning, his book. I don't know if you guys went over this when you're talking about it. Or Rauschning says
we
that
talked
Hitler.
about Rauschning several times. I've quoted him on the show.
Go ahead.
Did you do the there over in the corner he's there thing where Hitler's like lips were white?
I think I talked about it, but I don't know if I quoted it or not. But I'll be glad to hear it again.
Oh, sure.
Well, Rauschning says that here he says Hitler was standing up in his room, swaying and looking all around as if he were lost. It is he groaned. He's come for me. His lips were white. He was sweating profusely. Suddenly he uttered a string of meaningless figures, then words and scraps of sentences. I bet those are probably magical terms that Rauschning didn't know about. He's probably speaking in some kind of Crowley gobbledygook. But he says, then Rauschning says, it was terrifying. He used strange expressions strung together in bizarre disorder. Then he relapsed again into silence, but his lips still continued to move. He was then given a friction or something to drink. Suddenly he screamed, there, over in the corner. He is there. Now, it's interesting that he says over in the corner is there because when Crowley was dictated the book of the law to him, he said that the voice emanated from the corner of his temple. So it seems like, these evil spirits are like, they like that little part of the room or something. But, yeah, Hitler was, he was demon possessed.
There's some reason that they can manifest themselves through a corner. I'm not sure exactly what that is.
I think that the corner is very important to Robert Johnson, the supposed channeler of the blues, It's like I think that
who
when
made
he
a
was
pact with
doing
the devil, supposedly.
And I think that when he wrote his music, he would go sit in the corner and play it like it's really odd similarities.
I've seen interviews with old bluesmen that knew him, the guys that he tried to get into their bands. And one guy, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the old bluesmen. He said the guy was terrible. He was really bad on a guitar. He said when we first knew him, we didn't want any part of him. We'd just tell him, hey, boy, just go sit down. We don't want to, we don't want to listen to that. That's awful, And he said the next time I saw him a few months later, he played some of the best blues I've ever heard. And he said, I don't know how that's possible. He couldn't figure it out. Well, I think I can. He made a pact with the devil.
And remember,
the cornerstone of all blues, rock, hard rock, everything goes all the way back to Robert Johnson and the Crossroads.
Right.
Real quick aside, but then I want to get back to a serious note. But one of the things I've always wanted to do, and I have not done, is interview the author of Hellhounds on My Trail, which was talking about certain pacts, if you will, that musicians have made. A very interesting book. I've not heard the guy around in quite some time, but it deals with Johnson's decision at the intersection, the crossroads, if you will, the corner, and others as well.
Yeah.
But also about which we're speaking now is also if I could grab the books, I'd go back and see if I were right. But that when you deal with these situations in which it is insinuated or flat out stated that someone has made a pact with the dark side, I'm wondering if we wouldn't see the same scenario in Marlowe's Faustus. I forget who wrote what. Marlowe's Faust, and is it Goethe's Faustus, whatever it is.
I think Goethe wrote Faust.
Yeah, and I mean, if you remember that, and apparently the true story upon which this is all based is of such a person who made a pact and double-crossed the devil and wound up with his head facing north and the rest of his body facing south.
Yeah. That has a tendency to mess up your whole day.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do? Hello, I must be going. But
it's just like the same thing with Lennon. Lennon supposedly made a pact himself, and they came and collected him, over at the Dakota or whatever.
All right,
I've heard that bandied about, and he was definitely into the occult and was very familiar with all that kind of stuff.
Apparently, that's true. And man, you talk about really bringing you down, because John Lennon was always one of my favorite musicians. I loved the Beatles. And when I found that out, it was just so depressing, to think that he was involved with forces of that nature.
All right,
now, they took him down.
As only I can do. When you hear that,
there was something. There was a song that he wrote. I'm trying to remember, but it's everybody's a star is something that Crowley wrote. That everybody's a star, that everybody has a destiny, blah blah blah. And John Lennon wrote some lyrics very similar to that.
Now,
Instant Karma, his song Instant Karma is about that sort of thing.
I know. Take this
You're a
on.
superstar, yes you are, blah, blah, blah.
Take this on now, all right, with all we've been talking about legitimately without going too far afield. This ties in almost everything with the Germans and all this. Gordon Comstock emailed me the other day saying that he may have come upon or at least became aware of a rationale for Lenin's assassination. A lot of people like to say, well, he was going to talk or he was going to lead, the country in a revolution. I'm thinking, and I think you both can agree, if there is any one album that is probably the sweetest, nicest album ever made, it was the one he made before his death, and it's Double Fantasy. I love my wife, I love my children, this is good, all this other stuff, and now he gets popped. But I think Gordon, what he had said was that he was going to talk about the influence that, now we've talked about Theodore Adorno, this is like the story that won't die, but Gordon had said supposedly it was Tavistock, which then again you could say, okay, Adorno might have been in there also. It's much too late for Bernays, that's for sure. So what Gordon said to me, he goes, I think supposedly he mentions this in a posthumously released article, and it might be in a Playboy. I think he said Playboy. I got to take a look and see if that's true or it's Penthouse or whatever. And that would be easy to find out because obviously it would have to be very early in 1981 since he died December of 1980. If that is true, then that would make some sense. Now, everybody wants to attribute the Beatles' change and meteorical success, if you will, with somebody getting involved in their music. Randy Morgans was very adamant about this, and not wanting to waste his pearls of knowledge about music on me. He just said, they did things that were even like mistakes, and it worked. And I mean, I'll take that.
My father said that. My father was very accomplished on a guitar, a very good musician. He had been a semi-pro musician, but at any rate, my dad said, when I'm listening to these Beatles, I turned him on to some of that music many years ago. He said, I really don't like this, son. He said, because when I start listening to this, they do things that are really strange. And that's all. He just left it at that. He said, they do things that are really strange.
And this ties in again, Theodore Adorno, who is, you read his stuff, and I mean, it's really thick. I mean, he was a brilliant individual, a sociologist first, but also an accomplished musician. And that's why John Coleman in the conspiracy, the Committee of 300, whatever it is, the conspiracy's hierarchy, says that the Beatles were there at Tavistock, and so was Adorno, and that's how it went down. Now, two people, one that's an author, say that's not the case whatsoever. I don't know, but now what Gordon introduced into all this is, and remember, Adorno left Germany because of Hitler and came to England. Mm-hmm. And a sociologist, fine, and he had a lot of remarks about rock and roll, about which I guess he did not like, which means, okay, is that a cover for the fact that you worked with the Beatles, or is the fact that that's why you could not have worked with the Beatles? So all this is going on, but it's easy enough to find out in back issues of whatever skin mag that was, if there's a Lennon interview and if he mentions Tavistock, and then maybe, just maybe then, I think I understand that. And there's others that also say that just like what happened with Reagan, and who was it, Rabin? In Israel, you have a supposed shooter, and then you have the shooters. So right. There's another thing going on there. Did you hear that, William?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my understanding is that Chapman was mind-controlled. One of the followers of Crowley actually goes from Crowley to York to Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger said that Chapman was mind-controlled. He also said that so was Manson, but... And there's some weird connection. I think that Chapman handed Anger a bullet or something like that and said, this is for Lennon, so Anger kind of knew what was happening. But the real shooter for Lennon was the doorman, this Cuban-American guy, is my understanding.
Chapman definitely had ties to CIA mind control. In fact, he'd worked in one of their operations down in South America. I can't remember all the details. I'll pull it out.
World Vision.
Yeah, which was like a false front portraying itself as like a Christian evangelist group or something.
Right, exactly.
Right. And the affiliation with the strange affiliation with World Vision out there was Reagan's the guy who shot Reagan's dad. What was their last name?
Hinckley.
Hinckley, yeah.
Yeah, Hinckley's dad worked for World Vision.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Well, and that's interesting also because Hinckley, that family were Daddy Bush supporters through his campaigns, and it was known supposedly that what was it, Scott Hinckley was also close to Neil Bush.
Right.
In that Silverado situation, that's the whole story.
He was also involved with a neo-Nazi group and got thrown out because he was considered too radical.
Oh my God! And that's Neil Bush?
It's Hinckley.
It's Hinckley.
Oh my gosh!
Well, the thing is, I thought Hinckley was released into his family's custodialship a couple of years ago, and then I just realized, I guess a month or so ago, they're talking about how he may finally get released. And I mean, sometimes I don't get it, but I thought that was a little interesting. Yeah. But what was even further interesting is that he's going to be released.
His goal.
Well, but get this now. I mean, this is how much garbage this is. They're saying that, yes, Hinckley will be released, and he might have gone to his sister's care in Dallas or something like that. And she said, well, maybe that's not a good idea because the Bushes are nearby. Like, he might try to, right? And I'm like, those are the guys who told me to go do it.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to bother them.
Oh, my gosh.
You can't any Democratic politicians they don't like.
But, the whole story about Chapman walking up to some rock and roller on the beach in Hawaii and saying, this is for John Lennon, that almost sounds like, you've got a program here where you're going to inject that into the public consciousness or subconsciousness and then make it happen. Now, I wanted to mention this. And you guys...
the Catcher in the Rye, which has some connection, supposedly intelligence agencies have used that book before, and I know that Chapman I can't remember the details, but apparently he was obsessed with that book, Catcher in the Rye.
Right, yeah. That's what they caught him reading after he supposedly shot Lennon. He went back and sat down and pulled out
Catcher in the Rye. He just sat down instead of running away and trying to, make some attempt to escape, having just committed a murder in broad daylight. He just sits down and starts reading a book.
Now, we may now understand why. Now, Salinger wrote that book, correct?
Right.
Yes.
All right. He lived in New Hampshire, and for a while I did not live that far away from him. He was near the river, and I was on the other side in Vermont. But every so often, somebody would try to snap a picture of him. This guy lived as a recluse, and I believe that the story is correct. He would walk to his mailbox like through a tunnel. I know how strange that sounds, but the thing is, well, he clearly wanted no contact. And you got to wonder, for a guy who wrote as it's just as beautifully as he did, whether or not that whole scenario.
Really was.
Well, yeah, I mean, did that turn him into that? I mean, why did you become that? I mean, I can understand it, but I often wonder after that, that 1980 scenario, whether he was like, oh no, in fact, you know what? Now that I remember it, I was there before 80, so it couldn't have been the Chapman episode that might have made him be reclusive. He just was so. And that's why every so often one of the newspapers would try to get a photo of him because it was like trying to get a photo of the white buffalo. You know what I mean? Now, you mentioned something else, and we should remember this because just what you said about Hitler, and then I think you just brought it up, William, and I'm not kidding around about this, but everybody in the world said that Charlie Manson was a schmuck. How in the world could he have had that kind of power? Are we looking at basically the same type of individual who could have been invested?
Well, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Charles Manson had experience with Scientology in jail. That's what's known. Well, a lot of people don't know that Scientology is, affiliated with the dark arts, that L. Ron Hubbard was a black magician without a doubt. And they're always into hypnotism. So was Crowley. Crowley was into hypnotizing people. Same with Kenneth Anger. So you don't know, what's going on. If somebody's dealing with Scientology and they start doing the assignments and these kind of rundowns, these kind of funky things, they're titled one thing, but what they really are mind control techniques where you kind of self-auto-program. And some people are more programmable than others. There's a spectrum of receptivity, really, for each individual. Some people cannot be hypnotized, but some people snap right in and out. And those are the people's that the intelligence agents like Jolly and West and, there's a couple other guys, one guy's named Brand or something like that, Ewan Cameron, all these guys, those are the guys they look out for, they farm for, as the easily receptive hypnotized agents, and those are the ones that get used. whether it's Chapman or Sirhan. Sirhan had a massive head injury. He was a jockey, and he had fallen off the horse and hit the rail, the inner rail that the horse was run around. And when he came out of that, they could just program him just like a computer.
Oh yeah,
and he would snap right in and out.
Hit no program to kill Robert Kennedy. No doubt in my mind. There's a lot of evidence toward that. I mean, and it's public, but they still,
well, both of his attorneys said as much. One was Lawrence Teeter. His new attorney is this guy who was the attorney for the guy who shot Martin Luther King.
Oh yeah, I know exactly.
But he picked up. Teeter died young. Yeah. His attorney died young, and so now they're kind of trying to go back through, and they're actually putting this through this federal case that they're indicating that they're trying to argue that.
There's been interviewed on Black Op Radio with Leno Sanek. Leno Sanek does a lot of interviews with people who are involved with the assassinations.
Right. William Pepper.
It's Pepper. That's right. That is the name.
William Pepper. That's it. Exactly.
All right. Now, here's what I wanted to ask you also. I mean, if you guys aren't finished on that thought, by all means continue. Otherwise, I got something else to throw out to you.
I don't know. I don't even know how we got off on that tangent.
I do. It's my fault.
No, but I think it goes back to what Hitler, hypnotism. I mean, and there's arguments of Hitler using all these other different techniques to hypnotize his own people.
Right.
That a lot of those stagings and everything like that, and
it's all about
the lighting.
Black magic. It's all about black magic. And we're talking about Scientology. Well, L. Ron Hubbard was nothing but a black magician.
Absolutely.
And his own son even admitted that. I read part of the interview that his son did in, I think it was Penthouse magazine many years ago, and the guy was in hiding at the time, because his life had been threatened. But he finally turned against Scientology and started talking about how the techniques that Hitler used were the very same techniques that his father used, and talked about sex magic, which is something that Crowley was heavily into, and how that you could basically crack somebody's soul. You crack into their and just this terrible abuse of other humans, sexual partners. There's something about black magic and sexuality that just very much go hand in hand.
Exactly like absolutely perverse sexuality. If you read about Crowley and I mean, there's an apocryphal story about L. Ron Hubbard that can't be verified. It's hearsay. It's just one person's. This woman said, what L. Ron Hubbard liked to do is get on. He had this boat. He was a self-styled ship captain, and that was one of the ways he could avoid taxation and getting busted by whatever country he was in. But he had this one girl on a boat, and the stories that she told about him, and I mean, if you look at the whole totality of the circumstances of his life and what he would do to other people, they're probably correct. But what he did to her was so bizarre, and it was the soul cracking. He would engage in the most bizarre sex magical stuff, and his experience with sex magic goes all the way back to Jack Parsons back in Pasadena.
Right.
Around.
And they were both really Crowley's disciples in a sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's my understanding that Hubbard started Scientology on the day of Crowley's death.
Right.
Also, a character.
I'm sure that's just a random event.
No. A person that should not be forgotten in all this, and I think this happened before you came around the show, more or less, Larry, and that is when I had on Maury.
Yeah, I've listened to the interview with Maury, and that is one sad interview.
And what this does, William, it ties in a lot of this because, as I had other guests on and who were out there like Kathleen Sullivan, her family basically made her a sex slave for Nazis that had found a safe haven out around, I guess, Huntington Beach or whatever, and that also called into play Parsons and Jet Propulsion Laboratories.
Interesting.
Very much so.
It's one of the most intriguing and yet just heart-wrenching things I've ever listened to. It really it's a stunning interview. It really is. And
to let you know, William, too, I mean, again, this involves with a resurrection of Nazism. Maury was very clear that she was offered up by her family, and that all wound up, in California. Kathleen Sullivan was offered up in southeast Pennsylvania because of the Pennsylvania Dutch environment, which is German. And
right.
so
and then there's O'Brien too. What's the O'Brien?
Kathy O'Brien. Yeah, I've never talked to her. But
I'm not even sure if her story is real, but you never know. But definitely Maury. There's no way that I don't believe Maury's telling the truth.
No, I agree. I mean,
Maury's had to hide since, from what I understand.
Well, that's interesting because she would not return emails, and maybe within a year after she was on, people were saying, "Listen, I've not heard from Maury." Now we went back and forth for a while Beyond the Grassy Knoll was still up, because she was very concerned about certain influences on Eric John Phelps and some of the stuff that was coming out of him. And I have to agree, rightfully so. Sorry to drop names, but it is what it is. And his relationship with Greg Zemansky, who has to be the biggest phony in the entire universe. So be that as it may, but she called out a lot of things, and I was agreeing with her, and I'm like, you're right. And then after that, it was over. Now, have you heard, Larry, that, like, say, since, 2007 or, it had to be 2006 or 7, that she had to disappear? Well,
I read an article, I can't remember who it was by, but they referenced Maury, and in the article it said that some to the effect that she had disappeared. Nobody has been able to find her or contact her in quite some time. And this has been 3 or 4 years ago. Right. And that kind of sent a chill down my spine, because I'm thinking maybe she's revealed too much about satanic ritual abuse and pedophilia, yep, which is a very, strangely enough, a very, I don't know if you call it common practice, but it is widespread in this country. Sure. There's John Benet Ramsey, I'm really suspicious about that. I think that was a ritual satanic killing. Well, because of the time of the year as well. Yeah. But again, anyway, Adam Gorightly got an email from supposedly Maury. I mean, it was a person who, all right, he gets an email. The email address is Maury's. Nobody's heard from her for years. He sent it on to me and asked me, do you think this is she? And I thought that was interesting. Adam's a fun guy and all that other stuff, but he's serious about a couple of things. He just wasn't sure if that was the email, that kind of email that Maury wrote. So right. We don't know. Right, maybe trying to compare her style or something. Well, yeah, and she was trying to promote somebody else who was coming out with a book on something. So anyway, but William, the point with these two women is that they share the same story about being raised up by their parents with no compunction whatsoever about giving up their daughter for whatever they could exact from it. And she knew Jack Parsons. And she did, out there. So she winds up out there. Kathleen, and in fact, I always mention the fact that as Harry and I were listening to Kathleen tell the story, Harry's looking across the way to me, and he gives me an indication he's got something he's got to ask. And I said, fine. And then I said, Kathleen, if you will, Harry's got a question. And Harry said, Kathleen, are you saying to us that there's a little Deutsch in Pennsylvania Dutch? And she said, absolutely. So my point is, you've got them coming over to the United States, and this also harkens back to what was fictionally or otherwise promoted in the book Boys from Brazil. Because where does Sir Laurence Olivier wind up? He winds up in Pennsylvania. Let me tell you something. I know you're familiar with that, Liz, but my ex-wife was Pennsylvania Dutch, actually Lutheran, not Mennonite or whatever. But I've been to that area more than one time on family vacations to visit her parents and relatives, and it would be very easily for somebody who spoke only German to blend in, to fit into that culture, and because the older people there all speak German. They speak the dialect, known as Pennsylvania Dutch, to each other in the stores, on the street, and everything else. And I could easily see that happening. I'm not saying it did just because I saw that, but it could very well be that somebody could fit right in. Without a doubt, and that's where that goes. And again, people forget, because of California for the most part, that California is always thought of as the state of all kinds of occult groups and religions. But Pennsylvania, before California, Pennsylvania was home to all that.
whether you agree or not with whatever. I mean, where do the Quakers go? Where do the Mennonites go? So
it's places where they're tolerated, and there tends to be once a tolerance of groups that might be considered strange otherwise. Once that tolerance is there, then people tend to move there because, hey, if they tolerate this, then they'll tolerate us too.
Right. Well, it's just like Crowley in bohemian environments. Everywhere he went, every country, it was always bohemian, whether it's Paris, it's Greenwich Village, it's the bohemian part of London.
Weimar, Germany, yeah.
Weimar, Germany, everywhere.
I meant to ask you about that. That's something I forgot to ask you about. What do you know about his dealings there in Weimar, Germany? Was he involved with the art?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I wish I knew more. Crowley in those years was very mobile, but I know that in one of the talks that you and Viz had, you talked about Christopher Isherwood, and Isherwood was an acquaintance of Crowley. They spent time together eating and drinking, and I mean, I need to do some more research on that regard. I got to read all the Isherwood stuff, but they also had the same kind of, Crowley was pansexual and Isherwood was homosexual, so they had kind of similar.
That's interesting.
Pansexual?
Excuse me, but well, yeah. I mean,
yeah, he was trisexual. Would try anything.
Exactly.
No, but go ahead, William. I'm sorry.
So anyway, I would love to know more. It's hard to get into that. I'm sure that there's some German historians who are very familiar with that era, or that might have emphasized, what was going on in that kind of cultural environment. But I think, Isherwood knew him. There's also other English spies that Crowley was associated with over there, and I mentioned them in my book. And, I wish I knew more. I mean, Crowley wrote about his kind of adventures in that underworld in the Berlin.
I think he might have very much influenced that. It was a perfect environment for him because of the decadence there. But I think he may have influenced it.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, he wrote about all of his liaisons and his affairs, and he was, he claimed to have relations with 3,000 people in his life. So that he was
sheep and other animals.
Oh God. Anyway, but
and he wasn't in the group Kiss.
There, sorry,
he wasn't in Kiss.
What's that?
He wasn't in the group Kiss.
Oh man.
Sorry.
Anyway, he's that's okay.
We always do this. I don't know. I mean, there's something wrong with it, I guess.
There is. I mean, getting back to your question, there is a lot of room for. There's other places in my research that I just were hard to get information on. Just like with his time in Paris, he spent a lot of time Shakespeare and Company and all these other environments in the golden age of Paris, but I can only see it through the eyes of people who are English speaking. I don't speak French, so
right.
And the same thing with Italy. I'm sure that there's Italians who have great information on Crowley while he was in Sicily, but it's just it's difficult to.
The only person that I know of, that we were talking about, the only one I've read anything from was Isherwood. I've read just excerpts from some of his books, and I know that Isherwood was the guy who wrote the script for the movie Cabaret. That was based on an earlier work of his. It was by a different title.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Isherwood wrote Cabaret. And, of course, in that there's this whole thing about bisexuality, just people experimenting sexually and all kinds of weirdness. And I did not know he was homosexual. I assumed he was, he probably liked girls or was bisexual. Anyway, doesn't matter. But I do know that he wrote about the sexual deviance and decadence of that period, and he also wrote about the violence in the streets. How the Nazis and communists. Right. He was talking about many times you sit at a cafe and all of a sudden a fight would break out. Somebody break a chair over somebody's head and that kind of thing.
Well, something I wanted to mention a while ago, because we talked about the occult vaccines, if you will. With Hitler and others, I'm sure. Now, I'm not going to mention the name right now because I just want him to be okay with it. And he's been a guest at other times. What happened was, now, let me just ask you this. Have we all watched Men Who Stare at Goats?
I haven't seen it. I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I'm familiar with the information, but I haven't seen the movie itself.
All right. Now, that's kind of the light side. It's what's been given to people for general consumption. I will admit, though, that when it came out in November of that year, whatever that was, I had taken note during the shows that November, whatever year it was, I don't know, 09, 10, whatever, was a very heavy jingoistic month. They came out with a new, I don't know, Xbox thing, with the new war thing and all this stuff. It just was very heavy military. However, that's for general consumption. What this individual told me while he had to do work as a contractor in the Pentagon, he said with regard to occultism, really interesting stuff that was going on in some rooms in that place. And that makes me wonder now, too, in the whole of this, with those who wage war and such, are we really looking at the evil side very much a partner, and no matter who goes into battle? You know what I mean? So we're no different in a sense than anything else, if in fact what this individual said was true, and I believe it was, that there's like a certain, wing, if you will, that works on certain things, and I think we saw a certain manifestation of that vanilla-ized in Men Who Stare at Goats. And that's a pretty hefty statement. Do any of you want to hit at that?
I can talk to that. I mean, Hitler had his own, occult orders and occult and Anarnerby and all these other departments through a variety of his administrative bodies in Germany working on that. And the U.S. has always been, through the CIA, experimenting with mind control, the effect of drugs, and the final frontier is really the spiritual stuff, the ritual magic and its attendant, practices. So I think that, and it's always been there, and it goes back even to the Old Testament, people doing stuff like that, and different groups of people going to war and, having blood sacrifices before wars and all kinds of things like that, and actually sacrificing the people they've captured, whether it's the Aztecs or Mayans or something. So it shouldn't be as a supreme surprise that there are parts of the current American military that are doing stuff like that. I know for a fact that Michael Aquino, who is a member of the Temple of Satan or Set or whatever you want to call it, is a ranking colonel, a fairly high, well-established guy who's experienced with, psychological operations. I mean, I've read one of his.
He was big in the PAX program in Vietnam.
Yeah, I've read one of his documents that was published. I'm sure there's 10 other ones that are, for only military eyes only, but he went from psy war to mind war. I mean, he wanted to take psychological operations and just make a constant assault upon other people's minds part of the next generation of warfare, and I think we've seen that played out after 9/11. Confusion, dread, fear, and I know that he co-wrote that with this guy Vallely, who is on Fox News all the time. So,
there's kind of a allusion to him in the movie Apocalypse Now, where they come in with the helicopters and they're playing the Ride of the Valkyries.
Yeah, Bogdan.
And, just really trying to, and they just start shooting up this village. I mean, just blowing it to pieces. And kind of a psychological terror technique that they're using there. And that's, I believe, kind of an allusion to Aquino and the stuff he was trying to do in Vietnam.
Yeah. Also, it's I was going to say it's very Germanic also, by the way. Let's not lose sight of that.
Yeah.
But because it's Wagner. But go ahead, William, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just bolstering your statement that I don't have any evidence that it's happening inside. I don't know who your contact is at the Pentagon, but it shouldn't come as any surprise if it is happening now. And considering the people who are in power, it shouldn't it shouldn't be a surprise at all.
Also, I just want to ask this. It just popped in, but this isn't the extra question I was thinking of, and that is, I'm wondering if there's something ritualistic about this, or whatever it is. But I mean, the mainstream news can do whatever it wants to do, because it's told exactly what to let out and what not to. So they're the supposed gatekeepers, but they really aren't. So given all that we've said just now, I'm like, okay, so what is up with the 4 Marines pissing on the Taliban's?
Oh, man.
Is that supposed to mean something? I mean, what is this all about, really?
I don't know. It's I don't know why anybody's that surprised about it in a way, because you're talking about warfare, which is the most horrible thing that mankind can engage in.
That's right.
And this obviously shows hatred and contempt for the enemy. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that they should have done this, but I don't know why people are so shocked by it all. I mean, I guess the thing that really gets me a lot of times about American culture and about the way Americans look at the world is this dumb butt naivety. I mean, what do they think those guys are there for? They're a sniper team. They kill people for a living.
But why let it be seen on mainstream media? You would never let that get out unless there's a reason.
Yeah.
That's what's
I don't know.
And also, they mention this, and we all understand what this is at. And he goes, they said something about the golden showers.
Well, I tell you what, I think what it is kind of desensitizing the American public to war and the cruelties of war. If you remember the thing with Abu Ghraib prison, you remember how that just got, I mean, it shocked the heck out of people, at first, and then it just kind of like, just kind of, some guys having a good time, blowing off a little steam, and it kind of desensitized the public. And I think that may be it. It's like if you show people this sort of thing over and over again, then they become desensitized and they don't think much of it anymore. And it allows them to be more malleable for, the people that will be in the military in the future.
Leading to my next question, but William, you want to weigh in on that? I mean, is there something else going on that's ritual there?
I don't know. I agree with Larry. I mean, I think that's it. It's just further desensitizing and the new normal, new normal of this type of violence. And we've seen pictures of all kinds of, like that guy throwing the puppy off the ridge and all this other stuff.
Yeah, and it goes into the sexual realm too. It's like Madonna gets up and gropes who is it, Britney Spears at the award show, the Grammys or whatever, and kisses her on the mouth or and it's like, oh yeah, sure, it's okay to be a lesbian. It's okay, this form of sexual activity is here's two big stars doing it, for you kids out there in the audience, this is okay. And I saw an interview that Madonna had done with a magazine. It was like a gay-oriented magazine, and she said, well, if we just keep showing it over and over and over again, it will be accepted.
Are you trying to tell me
that's the whole point, I guess.
Are you saying then that in essence it breaks through another threshold where people will get inured to this? Yeah. All right.
Yes, I would agree with that.
That's all I can see. I mean, if there's some other reason, let me know.
All right. Now this ties in, and this is the exit question because you had mentioned before, and you and I had talked about it elsewhere, about the movie Cabaret, which I didn't understand what was going on pre-World War II in Germany. I guess we had something like that to a certain extent with post-prohibition. We went through that little flapper thing and all that. But it seemed like to die away. I think the decadence that was portrayed in that movie, I think, was at least supposed to tell us that this is a necessary step toward where Germany's mindset would be to let them go to war. That's my guess. I don't know. But what I'm asking is this. Since really the foundation block for what we have done, Larry, these 22 shows, was somewhat based on ominous parallels by Leonard Peikoff, who said, look, we are headed the same way, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. So, having said that, I'm going to go to you first, and then William, if you would. We can make a lot of what's going on and make it work to our basic schema. I don't think we're doing that. I think that it is just human behavior. It's civilization behavior. It's been like this forever. But we're the last, or at least the most recent manifestation of it. What am I saying? It was hard for me to understand, and William, you do, and Larry, you do, that Germany was a high culture place. I mean, I would always equate that for some reason with France and any other place but Germany. But Germany was where it was at that particular time. And then I think I can say this accurately, some sort of decay began.
Right. Well, the Nazis made a great deal of hay off that. I mean, they went to the more conservative elements of German society, middle class people. They brought out that this bohemian thing, the leftist, are bringing about is destroying what we need is a culture of hard work and the peasants on the farm and the family structure and personally I agree with that, but they were just using that as a means of getting into power, because really when you look at the Nazis themselves and particularly the brown shirts and their leadership, they were a bunch of flaming homosexuals.
Yeah.
It was they even went. There was a big scandal several times in major German cities where they would go and make out with their boyfriends, so to speak, or even it made it very obvious to the public, that they were homosexuals. And then if anybody objected to it, they would start a fight and beat the heck out of everybody. It was the decadence there was something, though, that to the unsuspecting public who didn't know how corrupt they were, they used it against their opponents and said, yes, we're going to get rid of all this when we come to power. And they even had an art show in Berlin in the 30s after they had taken over, which showed decadent art, and it was much more popular than the Nazis' approved art shows that they had.
Well, I mean, that was part of my question. So finish us off with this addition, and we'll have William also answer that. And that is, okay, if we are in some kind of extreme or accelerated moral decay, and I'm not even talking about Christianity, I'm just talking about, what was once prurient is now normal.
Right.
Are we just missing a little bit more of the nationalistic fervor, which I think we really need? We had that in 2001. Is that the spark that finally turns us into a Fourth Reich? And that's where I'll leave it. Go ahead.
My answer is I think so. I think that the society has probably been propagandized enough, but I just hope that people are starting to wake up and realize that the enemy isn't outside the door of this country; it's inside, and the people who are using the propaganda and the people who did 9/11 are the real enemies, just like Hitler did. He tried to convince that everybody outside was the problem when he was really the real destroyer of the country. And I think that's the danger, is that they're trying to goad us into wars that we don't even need to fight. And I think that's where Ron Paul is at least correct in that sense. It's like a lot of these wars are unnecessary, and we're being conditioned to believe that it's the only solution. Is it's more blood and violence, I guess. Okay,
Larry, anything?
Well, I mean, when you look at American society, these are statistics that don't lie, that give you a portrayal of a society. 1 out of 2 American marriages ends in divorce. That's 50%. I can say that in my own case. I'm divorced. You look at the schools; they don't teach anymore. The schools are basically in certain inner cities are like they're jungles. Like the old blackboard jungle of the famous 50s movie. I mean, it's much worse in these schools. Mm-hmm. You've got drugs are an epidemic in this country. I mean, they're everywhere. Tons and tons of people are addicted, are using, drugs, even hard drugs like cocaine and heroin. You've got basically moral decay everywhere you look. I mean, I don't think there's a homosexual agenda in the sense that, a bunch of leading homosexuals got together in a cloakroom somewhere, in a back room somewhere in Chicago and goes, yeah, well, this is what we're going to push. This is what we want to do. But, I mean, there is a homosexual agenda. There is an agenda, where they want to be tolerated. I mean, I think that's the whole thing with gay marriage. They want to be tolerated and they want to be seen as normal, and they're pushing that as a norm. And, I mean, anything goes. I mean, I think the next one they're going to push for is pedophilia. I think they're going to push for people, being able to have sex with kids and that being legal, or at least that being tolerated. And, I mean, pedophilia apparently is rampant in this country. I mean, just look at the Penn State scandal.
Which wants to go away.
Yeah.
And there's something going on there.
I mean, I see this country as being morally a cesspool. And obviously there's a lot of people who are trying their best to live decent lives, but I mean, it's really tough to raise kids nowadays. I mean, my sons are both grown now, but I mean, all the influences around, no matter how hard you try, the kids are influenced by their peers, and we're in big trouble. I mean, our society. You walk through a large city in the United States, anywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter. It could be New York, Seattle, L.A., wherever, Dallas, whatever, and there's a sense of fear. There's a sense of decadence. There's, it's really scary that there's an awful lot of places, where a person who is white can't go into that neighborhood and not be taking a big risk of, getting the hell beaten out of them and robbed or killed. And
I mean, in some of these cities, it looks like a neutron bomb hit. Like, there's no businesses. The banks have done a great job of stripping the wealth out of the country. Right. And, the banks really have done to the United States what the Nazis or the communists could never do, which is totally denude it of all of its wealth. I mean, you have people who are homeless when you have the banks holding on to like 9 million homes and not putting them on the market so that it doesn't collapse. So their rationale is we got to stabilize these prices while people are living in their car and dying of starvation in the United States.
Right.
So,
and our jobs are all going overseas. The jobs are all going overseas.
The political policies are insane, and the people in Washington are. They don't make a lot of sense.
Calling them people is probably the highest platitude you can give them.
You're right. Well said.
But, and here we go finally, and that is, if you have internal problems that are created by the upper level, shall we say, when the masses finally get kind of like a wind of this, the best thing to do is to tell them it comes from without. It's an external thing, and that's where I think we're getting prepared.
I.e. a false flag attack like 9/11.
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, it just goes back to how correct George Orwell, Eric Blair was. Blame it on a foreign enemy while the internal guys are the ones who created the feudal estate.
Right.
Look at how little we've built and created over the last 12 years since 9/11 in this country. Who has redone their house? Where's the more house building coming from? It's almost like it's stagnated. It's actually degraded while we spent all this money on bogus wars. I mean, it's not like it's not like Blair was reciting a playbook, but he just knew how the system worked.
Right.
Blame it on an internal enemy, solidify the class structure, and, I mean, that's one of the things that disgusts me, among other things, about Alex Jones, is he's always saying the foreign-owned banks or something like that. He always repeats it. Well, that's a bunch of hooey. The banks are right there. The banks that caused the problem are right down the street. They're 2 blocks away from where I live.
Well, it was the international Jewish conspiracy.
Yeah.
They were responsible for communism and they were responsible for capitalism. Well, which is it?
Yeah, really. Yeah, so, just blame the other guy when it's the real problem. The real problem of America is in country. It's nothing outside our borders. So, I mean,
it's a spiritual problem, I believe.
Well, I agree with that, too.
Problem of greed, but greed is really a spiritual condition. It's an evil spiritual condition, I think.
Oh, I agree with that, too. I mean, greed isn't even about money. It's about, wanting to have more than the other guy and not have some kind of egalitarian sensibility. Like, I've got it all, you're nothing, you're eating out of a garbage can, I get steak.
Right.
I mean, that's the wickedness of it. It's like some of these people and the banks could afford to have people living in a comfortable environment, but, they're not going to allow that.
Christ always taught us to treat others the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But here in this country, it's a big joke. Do unto others before they do unto you. It's the whole idea of American culture is get as much as you can together as soon as you can and retire. And screw anybody that gets in your way, and to hell with everybody else. Who cares about them anyway? There is a lack of concern, a lack of compassion for other people, and just a selfishness which is brought on by a sinful nature. It's a spiritual condition. And I mean, it's been like that, it ain't nothing new. I mean, this has been like that for thousands of years.
Come on, Larry, we're a Christian country. We're not like that. No, but I'm serious. I mean, we all stand back. And I mean, We got to carry on with our lives. I mean,
and God blessed us and patted us on the head and said, "It's okay. You can go ahead and kill those Indians. It's all right, because you're America and this is a Christian country, and anything you do is right." And a lot of Americans just don't seem to get the idea that we're going around the world exploiting that. I mean, the third world, the reason the third world's in the condition it's in is largely because of American corporations.
Listen, all right, hold on. Before we go any further, and then we got to bring it to an end. The one thing I have to laugh at, and we've talked about this, all of us have. Corporations have been farming jobs out since the 70s, but they continue to do it even in the face of the employment problem we've had. Verizon and J.P. Morgan have been farming jobs out, and that's just two. They're not the only ones. So I have to laugh because when I look at the politicians now, when they get into their whore mode and they want to have to actually move amongst the unwashed masses,
right.
They're blaming. They're gonna make job creation and they're calling job destruction on Obama. But I'm laughing, going, I wish somebody would answer the question.
They're all the same. I mean, they're all run by Wall Street. I mean, the corporations. That's we've talked about this many times. Mussolini said the definition of fascism. He said fascism should really be called corporatism because fascism is a merger of the corporation and the state, and that's really what we have in this country.
But Larry, that's the point. I mean, I sit there every morning when we wake up to the Today Show. Why I do that, I don't know. I'd rather hit myself in the head with a brick. But I watch this stuff, and I'm like, I look at Mitt.
The pain.
Well, I mean, I look at Mitt Romney. He looks like a little kid who's trying to get as much out as he can because he needs
He is a corporate raider. That's what he is. That's what he does for a living. I mean, they talk about this thing with Bain. I mean, he goes in and they fire all the people that he possibly can, and scale the operation down and then sell it for a profit. It's a corporate raider. That's what the man is. I mean, Wall Street, the movie Wall Street. I mean, if you've ever seen that.
Yes, we have.
That's what that dude is, man. I mean, and he comes on, look at me, I've got a big family. Woo, I have family values. No, you don't, you SOB. What about the families of all those people whose jobs were lost because you went in there and started cutting people?
Larry?
Care less,
Larry?
Yeah.
Back away from the phone.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're going to have to hose you down after this. But that's okay.
Step away from the microphone.
But my point was they don't talk reality. You want to talk about job destruction. It happened with corporations, and none of you people, and we know why, are going after them. Occupy Wall Street, which has a little bit of a platform, is too busy, and this is another jaded, movement. They're going after the salaries that 1% get. I don't care about that. Let them have their 1%. Just don't ship the damn jobs overseas. And that's what we should be talking about.
Well, that's the thing. There's no way that an American worker can compete with, say, a Chinese worker. The average Chinese worker makes about 50 cents an hour in a factory. And on top of that, the reason he can make it on 50 cents an hour is because in a communist system, he has his housing is paid for, is provided for him, his medical care is provided for him. He uses public transportation, so therefore he does not need a vehicle, et cetera, et cetera.
But Larry, you
cannot compete with that in this country.
Here's the problem. That's okay. Fine, you're going to do that stuff?
Yeah.
But what has always bothered me, I'm not even talking to the microphone. I'm talking to something else. I'm getting worked up, too. But my problem is that when this is what I said back when I was a kid in the 70s, which I think I actually spoke truth because it was so like common sense, but somehow like it doesn't work. But when you take your means of production out of here and pay those people 50 cents an hour, but you sell that sneaker or whatever it is for $50 a pair, which nobody in the world could afford except guess who? Americans. So goddamn you for pulling the means of production out and coming back and selling that crap here.
Well, eventually it all falls apart, Viz. I mean, eventually there's not going to be enough jobs to sustain anybody buying those $50 a pair of sneakers. I mean, outside of a very small elite that can afford it.
All right, called the NBA.
The middle class in this country, which are the kids for the most part buying those sneakers, the middle class in this country shrinks every day. I mean, it's getting to the point where you're going to have what's really coming in the future. I won't call it fascism. I won't call it communism. It's feudalism. And William points that out in his book. And it has a very good quote in there from someone, I can't remember the author of the quote,
Coleman?
But talks about who's it?
Let's all right, on that, because I'm going to muff you right now, dude. And on that segue, beautifully done by you, Larry.
Yeah.
We're going to go to Mr. Ramsey, who's going to talk about that quote and give us his final take upon, are we ripe for what we believe might be happening?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that it just goes back to the occult view of the world, what Hitler liked and what Crowley liked, and that is a feudalized system of a ruling class and a bunch of starving masses. Something medieval, and I think that that's what we've seen implemented in definitely the last 10 years, if not over decades, probably since the 60s or 70s, and it hasn't really been pushed back or stopped at all, and it's probably going to continue, and that's the New World Order for you.
All right, and finally, let me just say this to you. Because you're in a situation where you're raising children. Now, we, Larry, you, me, we email and talk to a lot of people, and the ones who are hurt the most by the belief that really things are not going to go well are trying to be optimistic because they do have children, and everybody can understand that. I'm like, yeah. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, the reality, but you also have children you have to raise in what is going to become whatever the life is, after the fact. Is there a way you balance that at all, or are they young enough now that you don't have to really talk to them, but you realize what they're going to go to, and,
Yeah, I mean, I think the sad reality is that, we've gone over the ellipse, and now it's just a declining state of wealth, whereas every generation of Americans was able to give their kids more and more. Now it's just like it's going to be less and less. So my parents less for me, and then it's just going to keep going down based upon the current political system. So, they're young enough. My kids are 5 and 9, so I don't have to, and I try not to explain those realities to them. But that's the way things look right now, as long as the Americans don't stand up and fight against their political oppressors that are in the country and the banks that are in the country.
Well, as long as we have two parties and they get all pissed off at each other, we are still just digging a bigger hole. I'm sorry to say.
Look at Obama. He was supposed to be hope and change. All he is another banker stooge. I mean, come on.
Well, listen, there is change.
Yeah, I mean,
things are
there's
getting
pennies.
worse.
So you get pennies. And the guy doesn't even work. He's
all
off
they
90
changed
days.
is the guy in the seat. They changed the face of the guy who's in the seat, and they're all controlled by powerful financial interests. I mean, it's Corporation A and Corporation B. There's a little bit of difference between the Democrats and Republicans, but it's about a dime's worth. There's nothing substantially different. They're all controlled by the corporate interest, and that corporate interest will make up the oligarchy, along with, in my opinion, and we've been over this. There's going to be in the New World Order. There will be the way the Bible describes it in Revelation is going to be an emperor or an antichrist, a false prophet, and then there'll be an oligarchy that
serves him. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, the first thing we got to do is get the presidents out of public housing. Okay, give me a drum roll on that. All right, listen, we've been talking with Larry the contractor guy, and also with William Ramsey, our guest star for this show, and we appreciate the fact that he turned up for this. And as it used to be when we were kids, we used to plan parties, and they used to just fail. And then sometimes something happens at the spur of the moment, and it becomes a very good thing, which is what happened here today.
Yeah, this has been a good episode.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. And folks, you go to occult911.org. .com, excuse me, but and also take a look at what's all there. The fact that Larry has often referred to William's book is not for any other reason, but it's good stuff. It's packed dense.
It is an excellent book. It is I would say, one of the most important books about the New World Order I have ever read, and I'm not shining William on. It's just that good. And it's mostly about Crowley, but it shows how Crowley's influence was so strong, and that Crowley was on the leading edge of bringing in the New World Order. Even though the SOB is dead, his legacy lives on, and in younger people, for that matter. There's many a rock star that's been influenced by Crowley. I wouldn't call him a young guy, but you got Ozzy Osbourne even wrote
he wrote a song.
Yeah, he wrote an homage to Crowley, which is sickening in itself.
I just want to know if he's had sex with his mother. I mean, Where did she come from, and why is she still around? I mean, God, get away with it.
He probably has to ask her, how to go to the bathroom each morning.
Man.
I don't know, man. It's very, very strange.
All right, well, listen, I'll tell you what. Before Larry goes hairy again, let my poor guest, William Ramsey, get out of here. But seriously, thank you all for listening to this. And, yes, Larry was not greasing anybody when he was saying that the import of William's book is just that. Please, if you get a chance, avail yourself of that. And both you, William, again, on short notice, wow, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Had a great time.
And Larry, all right, I'll see you next week.